Welcome to today's webinar, 10 Steps to Negotiate the Oil and Gas Lease. My name is Alice Hogue, and I'll be your instructor. Well, if you're taking this webinar, I'm going to assume that you already understand that the oil and gas lease is the cornerstone agreement of the oil and gas industry. Without the oil and gas lease, oil and gas companies would not have permission, would not have the right to enter onto the land of a mineral owner. So the oil and gas lease is extremely important to our industry. I'm also going to assume that you've run the chain of title or that you've had someone run the chain of title for you, and you understand that it is the mineral owner that has the executory right that actually signs the oil and gas lease, and that you understand a different person can own the surface and a different person can own the minerals. And if there is a difference, one person owns the surface and another owns the minerals, the mineral estate is dominant, and that is who you take that oil and gas lease from. Now, if the party owns both the surface and the minerals, they are said to have they own in fee simple. And if that's the case, then you're negotiating with the surface owner, you're already negotiating with the mineral owner. But I just want to make sure that distinction was clear before we get started. I also want to say that a lot of these techniques are not unique to the oil and gas lease. A lot of it's just common sense and knowing how to read people and having a strategy going into a negotiation session. So let's look at our agenda for today. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have an introduction. And this is just going to be a couple of slides, but I just want to make sure you understand the process of negotiation or negotiation of an oil and gas lease. And then I want to talk to you about what the basic standard terms are going into an oil and gas lease negotiation. From there, I'm going to walk you through the 10 steps that you need to follow in order to successfully negotiate an oil and gas lease. From there, we'll talk about common amendments. One of the things you need to be prepared for in negotiating an oil and gas lease is you have to be aware of what some common amendments are and have to prepare in advance how you're going to address those amendments. And then under Section 4, we're going to go over what I call tips from the trenches, which basically means some tips that I've learned along the way. And these are not, unique to oil and gas, but they are unique to any negotiating strategy that you might have, whether in an interview, negotiating a lease, negotiating with your spouse, or negotiating with your children. So I'm going to share some of those tips with you in the hopes that it'll help you close the deal. So let's begin first with an introduction. Now, as I'm sure you are aware, when we're talking about negotiations, we're talking about bargaining. We're talking about negotiating. We're talking about communicating with the landowner, more specifically the mineral owner and the oil and gas company. And the whole goal and purpose is to have an executed oil and gas lease. Now, every term in the oil and gas lease is negotiable, every single term. So you need to be prepared for the landowner that wants to change a term that you may or may not be familiar with. But every part of that lease is negotiable. It's a contract. So the standard, though, terms that you will be given when you're given the authority to take an oil and gas lease is you basically start out with what the bonus payment is going to be, what the royalty percentage is going to be, and what the term is going to be. The bonus payment is something that we pay to the mineral owner, and it's on a per acre basis. So it might be, $300 an acre. If you sign this oil and gas lease, we'll give you $300 an acre just for the signing, just to sign the lease. 300, I've seen this go as high as in the Barnett Shale in 2008, I think it was $35,000 an acre Chesapeake was paying. So the range can be pretty wide, but in general, that is what is inducing the party to enter into an oil and gas lease. And when I first became a landman, I couldn't believe that I had the best sales job in the world, because I was basically going in there and say, hey, if you buy this from me, I'll give you this huge check. So I thought it was a great way to do business. So the bonus payment, it is really the main inducement to get them to sign that lease. But also, is the royalty percentage. The royalty is once we have production from this well, we're going to pay you a percentage of that royalty or a percentage of those profits. And royalty percentages can range from 1/8 to 1/5, 1/4. That's about as high as I've seen them go. But you will be given that authority. And then the term is for how long that oil and gas lease is going to be in effect for the primary term. So how long are you going to have to be able to explore on that oil and gas lease? Now, once there's production, the lease is going to be kept in force by the production alone. That's called the secondary term. But what we're talking about here is the primary term. That is the length of time that the mineral owner, that the oil and gas lease is granting you to drill for oil and gas. So when you're given the authority to enter into lease negotiations, your boss or your supervisor, or your manager, or your broker, whoever it is, will say, don't go any higher than this bonus payment, this royalty payment, and this term. So they'll say, don't go any higher than $25,000 an acre, don't go any higher than 3/16 royalty, and don't go any lower than 3 years. So that's how you're going to be getting the information, the parameters that you can work in. And where you start in the negotiation process depends on how you assess the parties there. So let's now look at those 10 steps that I was telling you about. Oh, and one more thing. This is, just like any standard negotiation, like if you're negotiating for a house, you make the initial offer, they can counter with an offer. Then you can counter to their counter offer, and counter to the counter offer, back and forth until you have an agreement between the parties. Once the parties are in agreement, at that point you will have a contract, a legally binding contract. So let's now look at those 10 steps. Step 1 is do your homework. You'll remember this from school. And what I mean by that is that you need to know and understand every single clause in an oil and gas lease. I was doing some research on negotiating oil and gas leases, and most of the negotiation tips are for the mineral owner. And one of the things it said for the mineral owner to do is to strike the Mother Hubbard clause. So if you're a landman and that mineral owner has just read that on the internet, they are going to say, we want to strike the Mother Hubbard clause. They may not even know what the Mother Hubbard clause is, but all they know is they've read on the internet that you need to strike that clause. So you need to be in a position to explain to them what the Mother Hubbard clause is, what it does and what it doesn't do. And if you'll remember, it's also called the more or less clause, and it just says that this lease is estimated to comprise so many acres, whether it comprises more or less. Or it says that this is designed to include any acreage that's adjacent or contiguous to this land. Our goal as the oil and gas company is to make sure we leave out 1 or 2 acres in that description, and the lessor says, aha, you left this part out, therefore I'm going to drill my well. I know you've heard the geologist and the seismologist, but hey, you left this 1 acre out of my lease, so now I'm going to drill on that 1 acre or 10 acres or whatever it is. Especially when we're talking about in Texas, where we have meets and bounds descriptions. It's so many feet to the tree, it's so many feet to the barn, it's so many feet to the fence, it's so many feet to the creek. And over time, what happens? The barn burns down, the tree gets struck by lightning, the fence falls over, and the creek dries up. So fast forward 50 years, we don't really know where that tree was or where that creek was. So we're going by what's in the property description in the county records, but we don't want someone to come around and say, oh, the creek was really here and not here. So, we've got your oil and gas company. We're going to drill our own well. You don't have to give us a royalty. We're going to get a working interest. And we know it's good because we know you've done all your research. So the Mother Hubbard clause is really designed to protect the oil and gas company from that type of situation. So you have to be prepared to explain what the Mother Hubbard clause is and why you need to keep it in that oil and gas lease. Other terms are the savings clauses, things like continuous drilling or continuous operations. They may not understand the distinction between those two. And then there's another clause called the dry hole clause, what happens if we drill a dry hole. And usually you're given, if it's during the primary term, you're given the chance to drill another well or start paying delay rental payments. Well, what if they want to strike that clause? What if they say, well, I think if you drill a dry hole, it's game over, you lose the lease. You have to be prepared to explain to that landowner, well, hold on a minute. If we drill a dry hole, we're not the only parties that are going to lose. You're going to lose because you're not going to be able to get the royalty payment. And the royalty payments can be significant. So you need to explain to them that the dry hole protects both of us. If we drill a dry hole during the primary term, number one, at least we're drilling. And number two, we're still within the primary term. So why should we cancel a lease that's still in the primary term when we made a good faith effort to drill? So we want the landowner to let us to continue to drill, and the landowner really wants us to continue to drill as well because they're going to get a benefit from that. Other terms you'll see is the force majeure clause. They may not understand what that is or why we have that in there. You have to be able to explain that if something happens that's beyond our control, the lease will not terminate even if we do not meet the terms of that lease. And of course that provision defines what is out of our control. And then the Pew Clause. The Pew Clause is, we'll talk about that. That is a very common amendment. I want you to be familiar with the Pew Clause and understand, its history and its impact. Our preference would be to not have a Pew Clause. The landowner's preference would be to have a Pew Clause. So usually we acquiesce, but I want you to be familiar with it. Another thing I will say here is if you're not familiar with the oil and gas lease, maybe you're new in this business, I do have a presentation that I do on basic lease elements. And I even give you a sample lease guide in that presentation. And along the, it's like a legal sized oil and gas lease. And along the left side of the paper, I have in red the name of each of those provisions. So it's a great way for you to get really familiar with the provisions. I go into what the Mother Hubbard Clause is, what these other clauses are, and why they're important. So I think if you listen to that and look at that sample lease guide and have that as a frame of reference, I think you will have no problem doing this step of your homework. So that's a webinar that I have called Oil and Gas Lease Elements. Next is know your mineral owners. Now you're going to know them, you're going to kind of know them because you've run the chain of title. You're going to know how long this property has been in their family. You're going to know what the terms of other leases are. You're going to know whether or not they've ever leased before. You're going to know how they acquired this interest from their, they either purchased it or they inherited it or whatever the situation is. So you're going to kind of have a handle on your mineral owners. And that's just going to help you. You really want to know if they're sophisticated or a novice. Another thing that I look at is I try to evaluate that person's financial status. And if it's someone that is doing really well, I'm going to think they probably don't need that high of a bonus payment. What they're interested in, they can wait and get the royalty payment. So I might offer a lower bonus to the person that I thought was doing well off and a higher royalty. If it's someone that I think is not doing well, that is not financially well off, that really needs the money, I might come in at a higher bonus and go with a lower royalty interest. So you kind of have to be able to gauge and assess your mineral owners, not only from the chain of title, but by what you see around you. So that is step one, is do your homework. Step two is set the tone. Another thing is, we could call this, is prepare yourself. Get your mindset ready to negotiate an oil and gas lease. You have to be prepared, and you have to go in and be positive, be prepared. And another thing is, this is called Think Win-Win. And this comes out of Stephen Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. He says whenever you enter into any kind of negotiation, you agree up front. This is going to be win-win or no deal at all. So both parties have to benefit. Now, you don't have to say that in your when you're talking to the landowner, but as a landman, I will tell you, in the back of your mind, you need to be thinking that this is going to be mutually beneficial to both parties. Remember, a lease is a long-term relationship with the parties, especially if there's production. And you don't want them to ever feel like they've been taken advantage of, or that, in any way you did not give them what you thought was in their best interest. Now, I'm not saying that you have a fiduciary obligation to the mineral owner, to the landowner. You do not. But if you go in there with the idea that you're going to get the lowest possible bonus and the lowest possible and the minimum term, and you don't care about this landowner after this happens, all that matters is the here and now, and boy, you're going to look good to your boss. So that's what I mean by think win-win. And I think when you're negotiating a lease, it really is easy to do that because you see that these people are going to be making a substantial sum of money. I've seen bonus payments or royalty payments go out for $30,000 a month. I had a friend in high school. I looked up her royalty payment. I knew her family had royalty interest. She was getting $30,000 a month. So they really are going to win. And they really, if there's production, and they really will, they don't have to do anything for it. It's mailbox money. It's, as Dire Straits said, money for nothing. So I think it's really easy for us to think win-win because it's easy for us to see what the financial upside is for the landowner. Now, we're going to win as well, the oil and gas company, because we're going to make substantial profits. None of us would be in this business if there weren't substantial profits in the oil and gas industry. So thinking win-win is really a pretty easy thing to do when we're talking about negotiating an oil and gas lease because it really is mutually beneficial. The other thing I might do in preparing myself is especially if it's my first time negotiating, I might sit down and write down what I'm going to say. Just kind of write it out so I can have a feel for, how I'm going to say it, what I'm going to say first. You might even want to practice with someone. If you have a spouse, ask them, can you pretend to be the mineral owner? And, natural questions will come up as you're negotiating with your spouse. Maybe they're not in the oil and gas industry, so they might say, well, what's the difference between a bonus and a royalty payment? By them asking that question, you're going to be prepared for that if the landowner asks that question. So especially in the beginning, I think it's very helpful if you can practice. The other thing to set the tone is you need to prepare for objections. Most of you will know in the industry what the major objections are to the oil and gas lease. Fracking is a big deal these days, and a lot of people have objections over fracking. There's movies out there like Gasland, and there's a lot of controversy over fracking. There's a lot of issues with water that people believe may have occurred from fracking. They just don't know. It's just new technology, and people are hearing a lot of negative things about it. So you need to be able to convince them, first of all, explain to them what fracking is, and convince them that it's not going to hurt their water table, or it is highly unlikely that it will affect their water table. So, kind of get a feel for the area where you are in order to prepare for objections. What are some objections that I'm likely going to encounter? What are some reasons that they may not sign with me? And then just be prepared for that. So step 2 is set the tone. So you've done your homework and you've set the tone. Now what you're going to do is the first contact you make is going to be by phone. So you're going to call this mineral owner, and you need to project confidence on the phone. So when they pick up the phone, you need to be speaking in a clear speaking voice, just like I'm speaking now. You need to enunciate. That means you say the T at the end of the word. You say enunciating if it's ing. You need to enunciate your words. Now, this might sound really simple, but a lot of times you're dealing with people that are older, and older people have a harder time hearing. So if you speak in a very clear voice and you enunciate every word, that is going to help that person hear better. I do a lot of public speaking, as you know, and I also do readings at my church. And that's how I speak. I enunciate every single word. And I've had more people come up to me after Mass and say, I heard every word that you said. And they don't usually hear every word that the person is saying. So it's really important to someone that has a hearing loss, whether it's a severe or just a minor hearing loss. If you speak in a clear voice, you enunciate, they're going to feel like you don't have anything to hide, that you're basically showing all your cards. So that may seem incredibly simple, but it's very, very important. The other thing that I want you to do is smile. That's right. I know you're on the telephone, and I know that they are not going to be able to see your smile. But I can tell you that if you smile while you are talking to the mineral owner, it's going to come across in your tone. So right now I'm smiling. I don't know if you can hear that differently than the way I usually talk. There is a little upswing to the voice. There's a little rhythm that goes with it when you smile. So and that is a way that you project confidence to the mineral owner. I know what I'm talking about. I'm here to help. The next thing I would do, especially when it's a phone conversation, because there's so many telemarketers out there, is I would get to the point pretty quickly. I wouldn't say, how are you today? Well, because that person's going to immediately think, okay, this is a sales call. So I would say, so-and-so, my name is this, I'm with this company, and we'd like to make you an offer to lease your land. The terms that we're offering are, and you give the bonus, the lease, and the term. And then you offer to meet that person in person. Now, some of the things on negotiation that I read said that it's better if you get them to go to you. For some reason, that is a better strategy because they have already made the effort to go meet you, so they're already partially invested. So you want to meet that person in person. Now, they may say, I don't need to meet you. We can agree on the phone. This is what I'm expecting. If you can't give me this, then I'm not going to sign the lease with you. That's fine, but I always want to try to meet that person if there's any way possible. Let me buy you a coffee at Starbucks. Let me call you, what is that meal they always buy? DQ belt, the Dairy Queen belt buster, whatever it's called. Let me buy you that meal. Or let me come to your house. So, again, you're offering to buy them something. Let me treat you to dinner. I mean, it's not a big dinner, but, basically try to get the person to come to you, or if they won't come to you, then you go to them. There's so much that can be gained from a face-to-face, in-person meeting that you're just not going to pick up on the phone. I think that's why Skype is so popular now. It's one thing to hear it on the phone. It's another way to see the person saying it. So always ask to meet in person. Let me take you to, X place and treat you to whatever. So that is your first contact by the mineral owner. Again, you want to project confidence, get to the point quickly, and then ask to meet in person. Step 4 is you want to project a professional image. Look, you are an ambassador for our industry. You are the face of our industry. So if you do not project a professional image, already we sort of have a public image problem with the public, and you're just going to add to that. So you need to project a professional image. The American Association of Professional Landmen, I always thought it was the American Association of Petroleum Landmen. It's not. It's the American Association of Professional Landmen. So we're trying to get the image of a landman to be seen as a professional. You and I both know they are, but the public doesn't know that. So how do we project a professional image? Well, we arrive on time to wherever we've set up where we want to meet, and then we want to dress appropriately. In every place where there's oil and gas leasing, there is a landman's quote-unquote uniform. For men, especially in Texas, it is a starched button-down shirt, a new belt or a very nice belt, clean blue jeans, and clean boots. That is the uniform for landmen. And why is that uniform important? Well, if you go to someone's house in Texas, let's say, and you are wearing a three-piece suit, and you come in with your briefcase and your, all your fancy pens and pencils and stuff, and you come in there, what is that person's reaction to you going to be? Oh, this person is a lawyer. This person thinks they're better than I am. This person is more sophisticated than I am, and they may be intimidated by that. But if you dress professionally, boots for, in Texas, when we're talking about Texas, nice shirt, and I have this picture of this man here. This is sort of the image that you're looking for. You don't have to wear a jacket, but pretty clean cut. For women, I've got an example of a woman that's a landman in Oklahoma, and it's just dressed modestly, dressed professionally. I would never wear jeans to a negotiation as a woman. I would always wear khakis or black slacks. But the main thing is, no cleavage, nothing that looks like it's unprofessional. I think what this woman is wearing is just fine. Again, it doesn't have to be a dress. It doesn't have to be high heels. It doesn't have to be a suit. It's kind of, you're trying to portray the image that, hey, we're on the same page. I'm just like you. I'm no better. I'm no worse. So that's the whole idea behind dressing appropriately. Good grooming. I mean, do I really need to say this? Your hair has to be cut. Your nails need to be clean and cut. You need to make sure you put a mint in your mouth or brush your teeth or chew some gum before you go in there, because, it's kind of like a date. Nothing kills a date worse than bad breath. I would never, ever, ever wear baseball caps, flip-flops, or shorts to any kind of lease negotiation. I had an attorney tell me one time that they negotiated a deal with the landman over the phone, and all the parties had signed the oil and gas lease, and the landman said, well, I'll drop off the check. And he showed up in shorts, flip-flops, and a baseball cap. And the attorney said, I almost didn't give him the lease. Even though they had already negotiated the terms, I almost didn't give him the lease. So really, you need to project a professional image at all times. I see this in courthouses as well. You need to treat the courthouse with respect. You need to create a professional image for our profession. I would never go to a courthouse wearing shorts or a baseball cap or flip-flops. You need to project a professional image. That lets people know they're not dealing with a scam artist. They're not dealing with someone that they cannot trust. The whole goal of a professional image is that they can trust you. And again, I know it's popular in Texas, but please, no chewing tobacco, no, what's the stuff you put between your cheek and gum? I forget what it's called, dip. None of that. Try not to smoke before you go into their house. A lot of people are allergic to smoke. Women, try not to wear very much perfume, because a lot of people are allergic to different kinds of perfume. So the whole idea is to build trust. And if you go in looking like they do, but you're dressed as if you care what they think about you, you dress as if you are giving them respect, that's just going to go a long way to building that rapport, to building that trust that you need to negotiate an oil and gas lease. Okay, so now we're at the location. We are meeting in person. We're on time. We're dressed appropriately. Everything looks good. And then our next step is we want to enter with confidence. And what does confidence look like? It means you stand up straight, you walk with deliberation, you smile, you be friendly, you look the person in the eye. You're not afraid to look them in the eye. I have nothing to hide. You shake hands with them and make sure that that handshake is a firm handshake, but not a crunching handshake where the person's, arthritic hands are now hurting because you've crushed their hands. Be gentle when you shake hands, but be firm. You always want to be polite and respectful. In the South, that means you say, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, no matter what age the person that you are dealing with. If it's a salesperson in the mall in the South, we say, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. That just gives them the idea this person is just like me. They're treating me with respect. They care what I think. This is also a really good time to get information, because you don't want to just go straight to the negotiation. You want to make small talk. And one thing I would this is a great way to find out who's calling them and what kind of offers they are, but you have to be kind of subtle about it and say, wow, I mean, the courthouse is really crowded. I guess there's a lot of leasing going on here. And they might say, oh, yeah, oh, man, we've had 3 calls already, from 3 different companies. And, you're the 4th person that's called us. And you say, oh, wow, that is a lot of people. Well, do you know who else is out here? Now, you didn't ask them who called them, but you're asking them if they know of other competitors in the area, and you're trying to figure out what they might be paying. That's going to help you with your negotiation. A lot of times they'll tell you up front, this company offered me this, this, and this. But if you can go in with the offer, all this time you're just trying to evaluate where you're going to come in the offer. So when you make small talk, oh, nice weather we're having. Can you believe this? Or, stay away from politics. Let me tell you that, okay? Topics to avoid: race, religion, sex, politics, okay? We used to never include politics in that. Politics was something that you could talk about, but people have such strong opinions these days about either political party or all political parties that you need to be very, very careful. And I would just avoid any talk of politics or anything that might be taken the wrong way. There is a book called Getting to Yes, and it's written by Roger Fisher. And he outlines a technique for negotiating with people that gets them to say yes to the deal. And the technique is, and I'll just throw this out for you, is that you try to get people to say yes as many times as you can. It may be, has this property been in your family? And you're going to know that because you're going to have run the records. If it's something they've acquired recently, say, is this a property you've acquired recently? Yes. See what other questions I might ask. Are y'all enjoying the weather? Yes. I mean, you're just anything you can say to get them to say yes. The idea is that's going to trickle down, and they're going to be used to saying yes, and it's going to be easier for them to say yes than to say no. So that's the strategy. Take it or leave it. I just want to let you know that it's out there. And when you're making the small talk, that would be a really good way to kind of get them to say yes. And when you say yes, a lot of times it kind of gets you in a good mood, like it's positive. So that's sort of that strategy. I just wanted you to be familiar with that. If you want to read the book, it's called Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher. Okay. So now we've entered with confidence and we've made the small talk, and now we are ready to begin the negotiation. So they'll probably offer to have you sit down, and at that point you would then cut to the chase and introduce the offer. Thank you for meeting with me. As I said, I'm from this company, and we are prepared to offer you today this royalty for this bonus for this term of the lease. Would you be interested in signing that oil and gas lease? Now, the next thing you need to do is listen, because they may say, yeah, those terms are great. Let's go for it. You might want to start a little bit low because people do like to negotiate. They like to feel like they're in control. So if you start with a 1/8 and you end up at a 3/16 when you really wanted a 3/16 all along, and not a 1/4 or a 1/5, you're letting people have some give. You're letting people think that they are controlling the negotiation. And that's going to make them feel good, because then they're going to be able to brag to their neighbors and friends, well, he wanted to offer me this bonus. I said, no, I want this bonus. And he gave me that. People feel good about themselves. So you got to recognize that there needs to be some give and take in a negotiation. And you start with the highest end that you've been authorized to do. You're not going to be able to negotiate with them. And they're going to feel like, they're not in control, you're in control. Now, once you make the offer, you really need to listen. And you need to listen to what their concerns are and what their objections are. So once they start talking, you need to listen. But that's just going to convey that you're really interested in making this deal with them and that you really care about their thoughts. Along with that, you need to do something called mirror their energy and mirror their body language. Now, I know this might sound like kumbaya and candles to some of you, But have you ever had this happen where you come and say, you're never going to believe what happened to me. I had the best day. Guess what happened? Guess what happened? And the person you're speaking to says, calm down. How do you feel? You feel like that person has put you in their place. You feel like that person is not on the same page as you. You feel like that person does not appreciate you. So when I come into a home and I'm talking to someone, I'm going to begin to speak slowly. I'm going to introduce the offer slowly. Again, carefully articulating my words. But if they come back at me with a lot of energy and a lot of power, I'm going to go back at them. If someone says to me, I am really angry, I will say to them, I understand. If someone says to me, I'm really, really angry, I'm going to say back to them, I understand. So you see, you're going to mirror the energy of the person that is speaking. If they're speaking slowly and calmly, you speak slowly and calmly. This is difficult for people like me that tend to have a lot of energy. I have to really tone it down and follow their lead. The other thing is that you need to mirror their body language. Now, not obviously, okay, but if you're talking and they are sitting back in their chair, this is hard to do on a webinar, but you're leaning back in your chair, they're leaning back in their chair with their arms closed, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to lean back in my chair with my arms folded. If they're leaning forward, I'm leaning forward. Now, don't be obvious, okay? Don't do it immediately as if you're mocking them. But it's another way to build rapport. It's another way for them to feel like this person is on the same page with me. So if you're leaning back and they're leaning back, they feel like they're not under any pressure. But if they're leaning back and you're leaning forward, now they feel like you're trying to push them into something. You're being overeager. So find out, just kind of follow their lead, and eventually, their body language will shift. So if their arms are folded and they're leaning back, they're kind of defensive, they've got their torso guarded as if they're protecting themselves, they're defending themselves or whatever you say, and they're distrusting. They don't really trust you yet. They're going to hear you out, but they're not really trusting you. If they lean forward, now you've got their attention. That is a person that's interested in listening. So if the person leans forward, you follow their lead and you lean forward. You can do all kinds of research on body language. I think one statistic said that 90% of our communication is nonverbal. That is by body language. A lot of times body language is about how to find out if somebody's lying. But in a negotiation, you want to be able to read their body language to know where you stand in the negotiation. One piece of advice that I will give you is that your typical stance should be your arms uncrossed in front of you on the table with your torso open. You might also uncross your legs. So you're trying to show that you, sorry about that, you're trying to show call from 28137. Sorry about that. So where was I? So there's all kind of body language information out there. So one is that, as far as when you're presenting an offer, you want to have your upper body open. So you want to have your shoulders back. You don't want to have your arms crossed. You even want to put both legs on the floor. Like you're trying to convey, I'm not hiding anything. I'm open. I'm hearing you. There's different ways that you can also analyze someone's body language by what their hands are doing. If someone forms a tower with their hands, almost like a church steeple, that person is pontificating. They're thinking critically. They're listening, but they're thinking critically. If you respond to that by interlacing your fingers, that is a message that you're trying to answer their questions as thoroughly as possible. If they put their hands together in a prayer position, or better yet, if you put your hands in a prayer position where your fingertips are touching and your palm is touching, that conveys uncertainty. So you want to, as much as you can, keep your upper body open. You're mirroring their energy, you're mirroring their body language, not in any kind of obvious way that's going to make them feel like you're mocking them. But what you're trying to do here is just trying to build the rapport. Now, I know most of you are familiar with personal space. Personal space is a zone that you have around you that everyone expects that will be respected. So you need to make sure you don't get too close to people, because what happens then is they they push themselves back or they lean back. So just like in any social situation, and I'll tell you, landmen are very good at reading people. Landmen are very good at communication. So I don't think this would be an issue. But if it is something that you have a problem with or you've been told to have a problem with, really make sure that you avoid that in the negotiation, because it's going to make them feel like you're putting pressure on them, you're too close to them, you're too eager. So you want to make sure you watch your personal space, give them as much space as they need. So that's how you begin the negotiation. Now, I have a technique that I use when I'm negotiating with couples. A lot of times the negotiation is with people that own community property, or even if it's someone that is if it's their separate property, they may want their spouse to be included in the negotiation. So as always, you want to be polite and respectful, both to the man and to the woman. Never assume that the man is the decision maker and the woman is not. If you in any way show that you don't believe these two people are equal, if you pay attention more to one than the other, that may be misinterpreted as flirting. So you want to be polite and respectful, and you want to treat them equally as equal partners. The same rules apply with the body language. Mirror their body language and mirror their energy. Watch how they watch each other. Sometimes you can tell when they're about an agreement because they make eye contact and they kind of nod. So when you're getting that close, you want to say, so I'll just leave the oil and gas lease with you. Here's the draft, and if you have any questions, call me. You can just mail this in. Here's the self-addressed envelope if you want. So watch for when it's time to go in for your close. The other technique I use is something called divide and conquer. And it's not as sinister as it sounds. But if I am talking to a couple and one party is with me and the other party is against me, let's say in this picture here that the man is against me. He's leaning back. He's folding his arms. He doesn't want anything to do with the oil and gas company. And the woman is leaning forward just like she is, very polite, very kind eyes. And she is interested, and I can tell that she's interested. I'm not going to continue to negotiate with both of them. I'm going to focus on the person that's on my side. Now, you have to be careful because, as I said above, be polite and respectful. But this is after the negotiation has started. You've been treating them politely and respectfully and equally. Now one person is coming ahead in your favor and the other person is hanging back. I'm going to focus on the person that is coming around to my side, the person who agrees with me. Because I know, rather than argue with the husband, rather than argue with the person that doesn't agree with me and it get into a big ugly mess, if I can convince the person that's on my side that this is a good deal and that this is in their best interest, I don't have to then negotiate with the husband. The wife will then convince the husband. And her influence is much greater than your influence. Same thing if the roles were reversed. If the woman was against it and the man was for it, I'm going to talk to the man and I'm going to get him to my side. And if I can get him to agree with me, I then don't have to argue with the woman. I just let him convince the woman. So that's called divide and conquer. You don't start off that way, but once you see that one party is going to your side or the other party is going to your side, then that's when I would zero in on that party. I would limit my negotiations to that person and then let that person use their influence to convince the other party. So that is negotiating with couples. Step 8 is handling the counteroffer. If they come back with a different number than what I proposed, I want to say, what is your concern? What are your objections? They may say, I'm just really worried about the environmental impact of this. So most of us would think, oh, well, they don't agree to the bonus amount or the royalty amount. I'm going to go up on it then, or I'm going to go up on the royalty amount, when that's not even their main concern. They're not saying we're not going to sign because we don't like your terms. We're saying we're not signing because we're afraid of the Environmental Act. That completely shifts your focus from finances to environmental questions. You want them to ask those questions. But if you don't understand the objection, the temptation is going to be just to keep going up or down on the price. Price isn't everything. Money isn't everything. So you have to understand their objection if they come back with a counteroffer. And then you say, well, what have you heard? Let's say it's fracking or the environmental. What are your concerns with respect to fracking? Well, get them to talk and get them to say what their concerns are. Well, I saw the movie Gasland, and I just think all those people got sick after they did the fracking. I just don't know if I want to do the fracking. Now here's your opportunity to educate this person about the fracking process. This also goes with doing your homework, because you've got to understand how an oil and gas well is drilled in order to do this. But you need to be able to explain in as much detail as you can, and without overselling it, if you will. Earlier I said that it's unlikely that this is going to affect the water table. Not, this is never going to affect the water table. You never need to worry about that. While it's true that I think it would be nearly impossible, well, impossible from the chemicals that are injected into the earth to travel up through impermeable rock to the water table, I don't know that for sure. So I'm going to, as much as I can, say, look, I know that's out there and I know that's scary, but let me just explain to you how this works. I'm not giving her any guarantees. I'm not saying that this is never going to affect your water quality, but I am going to explain the process to her so that she can make a decision whether it makes sense. Another technique is respond with, you never give without getting. So you say, I want to, let's say they want a higher royalty payment. Okay, if we can agree to a lower bonus, yes, I'll give you the higher. So you never give anything up. This other strategy, limit your authority. A lot of times people want to get the deal done right away. So if you said, well, I'm going to have to check with my manager or my supervisor for that, they might drop their request for whatever provision they're trying to add. So I want you to understand now the counteroffer is not always going to be just about the money. There's going to be environmental amendments, and we'll talk about that when we get to the amendments. But the bottom line is you have to know how to handle an objection, how to handle the counteroffer. And what you need to know is you have to ask questions. You have to really understand where they're coming from so that you can specifically address their concerns to get them to sign the oil and gas lease. So be prepared for the counteroffer. You know what's going on in your community. If there's protests, no fracking in this, you're going to know before you talk to that landowner what they're hearing. Look at their local newspaper. Look at, meetings that are being held. Try to get a feel for the area and what the common concerns are that you will handle. Make no guarantees, but make sure you understand and treat their concerns as legitimate. So you don't say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. Don't worry about water. Now you're patronizing. You need to say, here's how that works. Here's where the water table is. Here's where, this is the depth that we're drilling. By the way, it's almost like a mile into the earth, so very far from the water table. So you just need to be prepared, and I guess that goes with the homework. Know how fracking works, know how a well is drilled, know what the terms of the oil and gas lease are. So that way you're going to be able to understand their objection, but you're only going to get there if you ask the question. All right, step 9. To me, by far, this is the most difficult step, because once I see that they're coming around, the temptation is to rush the close. Okay, so let's get this signed and taken care of. Okay, what you want to do is you're not over eager to get this signed. You only want them to sign if they want to sign. You don't want them to feel like you're being pressured in any way. So at some point in the negotiations, what will happen is there is a pause. there is a silence. And the temptation is to fill that silence. What's difficult is to refrain from speaking. What that indicates is that that person is thinking it through. So you want to respect that. You want to lean back and let that person think it through. Don't jump in there and say, okay, again, the offer was for this bonus, for this. Okay, now you've taken him out of his thinking, and you've basically begun the negotiations anew. So once there is a silence, it's not an awkward silence, not an awkward pause. You need to take the time. Let them think through their thoughts. Then let them give you your answer. And a lot of times it'll be, okay, where's the pen? Where do I sign? The other thing that you have to worry about when we talk about don't rush the close is to stop at yes. Don't oversell it. Now, this may seem obvious, all right, but this is how this might work. The person says, okay, where's the pen? Where do I sign? He's got the pen in his hand. He's ready to sign. And what do you say? Mr. So-and-so, you are not going to regret this decision. You're going to be very happy with the royalty that you get. And the, uh-oh. Well, let's talk about that royalty again. You've just opened up the negotiations anew. Once they say they're going to sign that lease, be quiet, shut your mouth, and let them sign that oil and gas lease. Also, and I don't think I need to say this, but once they sign the lease, don't over-celebrate. Don't act like this is the happiest day of your life. You're so glad you got this lease. Woohoo, because that's going to make them think, what have I just done? What have I just done? So you want to act like this happens all the time. It's no big deal. You get them to sign the lease. Thank you for your time, sir. It was a pleasure meeting you. You know, you're not going to ramp your energy up after he signed the lease, because that's going to leave him with a feeling like, maybe I rushed into this. Maybe, wow, why is he so happy, you know? So you just need to act like no matter how big of a, how big of a deal it is, how much acres they own, you know, this is very casual. They sign the lease. You say thank you. You don't over celebrate. So step 9, I think, is the hardest, especially for us extroverts, because we don't like the silence. It's uncomfortable. So we either want to fill the silence, and then once they sign, there's going to be more silence while they're signing. While he's signing, we want to start talking again. Close your mouth. Respect the silence. Let the man think. Let him sign the oil and gas lease, and then act like it's something that happens every single day. And, you know, this is good, but it's not anything you're going to go out and drink a beer over. Okay? So don't rush the close. Step 10 is finish strong. You came in there with confidence, with your head held high, your posture back, you're smiling, you're walking with deliberation. Shake hands with a firm handshake. You know, no matter how it goes, even if they say, well, we'll think about it. And then at that point, then you leave them with the draft, you give them your business card with your contact information, and you shake their hand. You never want to look like you're defeated or things didn't go your way or you're sulking. No matter what they say, act like you do a million of these every day. If he doesn't want to sign, it's not going to ruin your day. So you want to finish strong, confident that they are going to sign that lease and mail it in and then cash their draft. So you might want to say, I'll give you a call tomorrow to see how you're doing, or to see if you've made a decision. Or you may say, I won't contact you again. There's the lease, but you can contact me if you have any questions. So you say what the next action is going to be. So those are the 10 steps to negotiating the oil and gas lease. So let's just go through them. The first one was to do your homework. The second one was to prepare yourself. That means you're positive, you're prepared, you want to think win-win. You might practice or write down what you said. Next was to contact the mineral owner. And again, you want to speak with a clear voice, even though it's on the phone. Get to the point quickly. There's a lot of telemarketers out there. And then ask for the person to meet you somewhere. Step 4 is your professional image. You want to arrive on time, dress appropriately, pretend like you're getting ready for a date, good grooming, no baseball caps or shorts or anything like that, no chewing tobacco or smoking products. Then step 5 is you enter with confidence. You finish strong, you start strong. Smile, be positive, use all your landman charm to show that you are genuinely interested in getting this lease from them. And then don't forget about making small talk. That's a great way to get information about your competitors. Step 6 is begin the negotiation, introduce the offer. That's when we talk about mirror image and or mirror body language and mirror energy level. Then I gave you a strategy for negotiating with couples in step 7. Step 8, we talked about how to handle the counter offer or how to find out what the objection is to your counter offer. And step 9 is don't rush the close. Very important. Step 10 is finish strong. So with that, we're now going to turn our attention to some common amendments that will come up sometimes in a negotiation. I used to always see there is a clause in the oil and gas lease that says that the lessor agrees to warrant and defend title to their land. A lot of times this warranty clause is struck. And what we're basically saying in the clause is if for some reason we take this lease and you don't actually own the property, we have the right to sue you. So because you guaranteed to us, you warranted to us that you were the owner. A lot of people will strike this clause and they say, look, you hired the landman, you ran the chain of title, you hired the title attorney. Why am I going to guarantee? You have superior knowledge to me. So they'll ask to strike this warranty clause. That is no big deal. In most of the companies that I've worked with, that is not an issue. Let them strike the warranty clause. They might also want to talk about where to put things like flow lines or equipment. And, as long as that person's reasonable, a lot of times we'll agree to this. It just requires us to consult with them to find out where it's best on their property to place the flow lines. If the cows are here, let's not put them near the cows, put it over here, etc. The next one is consent to assign or notice to assign. Some lessors have had bad dealings with a certain oil company. And they have decided and told all their neighbors and friends and relatives they are never going to lease with that person again. Let's say it's ExxonMobil. They had a bad experience with ExxonMobil. So they might say to you, before you can assign this lease, you have to get my permission because I don't want this lease to end up in Exxon's hands. That's pretty tricky for us. That's a big burden that it puts on the oil and gas company because it limits who we can assign the interest to. If we have to get her consent, if we have to get their permission, that's a huge burden on us. And unless it's a lot of acreage and we really need it, we probably wouldn't agree to that term. Notice to assign is another way, not nearly as onerous. We just have to let them know, hey, this lease is being assigned to so-and-so. A lot of times these people will negotiate with a broker and they think they're dealing with that broker company, and that broker company owns their lease. And the next thing they know, ExxonMobil's coming in and putting all their equipment. They're confused. Well, wait, we didn't sign a lease with you. We signed a lease with this guy. So if they have a clause in there that you have to give us notice to assign, they're just saying, we want to know who's going to come on the property. You don't have to get permission, but we do want notice. A pew clause we'll go over next. It's a very common amendment. I want you to understand it. Also in Oklahoma, there's a statutory pew clause. So we'll talk about that in a minute. By far today, a lot of the amendments are environmental. We're getting a lot of bad press about fracking, and people are very concerned. I think this is very reasonable for them to ask for accommodations in the oil and gas lease, and really pretty easy for us to do because if there is some kind of a damage, we are going to be held liable anyway. So let's just agree with them up front what our liability is going to be so that they can have some comfort in moving forward with the oil and gas lease as long as we put these environmental protections in. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Haynesville, but one of the lessors was a woman named Cassie. I can't remember her last name. And she ended up getting becoming the negotiator for a group of people in her section. And it was quite a large area. So she was negotiating for a lot of people. And unpaid, by the way, just something she wanted to do. Why? Because she was concerned about the environment. She had seen something that happened in Dewberry, Texas, where there was an injection well that leaked. This is an injection well on the surface, okay? And it had leaked and it went into the water tables. And those people could no longer drink their water or use their water or anything like that. That was her main concern. Yes, she was concerned about the bonus amount, but her greater concern, and the reason she organized all these people, was because they wanted to protect the environment. So you need to be prepared to discuss those issues, and a lot of times like I said, we'll make the exceptions. You know, we'll accommodate them if what they're concerned is environmental. Okay, so let's look at now the Pew Clause. I'll give you a little bit of history. It's called the Pew Clause, and it's easy to remember because the oil and gas company thinks it stinks. And why do they think it stinks? Well, one thing is that if you have an oil and gas lease, let's see if I can draw this out. If you have an oil and gas lease here, okay, any well put on this lease that's producing is going to hold the entire lease. It doesn't matter where the well is, it's going to hold the entire lease. But let's say this is your property, and the oil and gas company comes in and they create a spacing unit that's like this. Oh my goodness. I was trying to use a different color pen. And then let's say that's their lease, but they create a spacing unit that's like this, okay? So if you have pooling, a well anywhere on this lease is going to hold this entire lease. So if we drill a well here, we're not only going to hold the acreage that's in the unit, but we're going to hold the acreage that's outside of the unit. Does everybody see that? The lease requires that we produce to maintain that lease. If we pool it, it doesn't matter where the well is placed. All of the people that have a lease in this area will get a royalty payment. But they're only going to be paid for their share of the acreage that's included in their unit. In other words, they're not going to get any payments on this. So in 1947, a man named Lawrence Pugh, who was a Louisiana attorney, said, you know, that's not fair. That's not right. If the pooled unit is over here and part of the lease is inside the unit and part of the lease is outside the unit, oil and gas company, you need to release the part that's outside the unit because that person's not going to get paid for it anyway. So they have what they call a Pew Clause in the oil and gas lease. And it reads, in the event a portion or portions of the leased premises is pooled or unitized with other land so as to form a pooled unit or units, operations on, completion of a well upon, or production from such unit or units will not maintain this lease in force as to that portion of the leased premises not included in such unit or units. This part. This well is not going to hold this part of the lease. So you have to release that lease of record. That gives that landowner the opportunity to lease it to someone else, get another bonus, and possibly get another royalty payment. So that is the Pew Clause. Now, there's different types of Pew Clause. This is basically known as a surface Pew Clause. You have to release that part of the surface that is not included in the unit. But there's another kind called a depth Pew Clause. Now, some people call this horizontal and vertical. But I've been in classes where what you think is horizontal is not what they think is horizontal. So they say, or vertical is not vertical. So I just say surface and depth, okay? So the depth says once you drill to a certain depth, you have to release all depths below that, or 100 feet below that is what it usually says. Very similar to the surface, but it's for depth. It's to limit the depth that you will own. And it says, it is understood and agreed that 1 year after the expiration of the primary term of this lease, upon the expiration of any extension or renewal or after cessation of operations as provided herein, whichever occurs less, lessee, that's the oil and gas company, shall release all rights lying below the stratigraphic equivalent of 100 feet below the base of the deepest producing formation in any well drilled on the leased premises or on lands with which the leased premises has been pooled or unitized. So, you drill to a certain depth, you have all these opportunities to get a renewal, maintain operations, but whatever occurs last, we're going to go 100 feet below that, and you have to release everything. So that's called a depth pew clause. Surface pew clause and a depth pew clause. These are very common. Like I said, Oklahoma has a statutory pew clause, so even if you don't include this as an amendment, it's deemed to be in there by virtue of the statute. I think it's just for surface, though. I don't think it's for depth, but I may be wrong about that. Okay, so environmental amendments. This is huge now because there is so much concern about the environment. So these are the types of environmental issues that I see. First is noise abatement. I don't know if any of you have been out in Wyoming where they're doing coal bed methane drilling, but they have these compressor units that's basically pushing the gas through the pipeline, and they're very loud. It's an engine, and it kind of boom, 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 and people say that they can be miles away and they can hear this thumping sound. People have argued that it spooks their horses, and it basically just makes it an unpleasant place to live. It's like noise pollution. So they may put in their clause, we want some kind of noise abatement procedure. And they do make these kinds of insulated houses, if you will, or sheds. And the compressor goes in there, and it reduces the amount of noise that you will hear. Also, with noise abatement is sometimes, once you have drilling, you're going to have a bunch of trucks coming in and out of the property. So you might want to say no trucks after, or they might want to say no trucks after a certain time when we're sleeping. We don't want any drilling to occur. Again, that's a noise abatement amendment, an environmental amendment. Distance from homes, just basically say there should be no well within so many feet of my home. I negotiated an oil and gas lease for my brother that said there will be no surface use of this interest, so that he wouldn't have to look out his window and see an oil and gas well. Water is a huge issue. Water, not only because some people think that fracking contaminates it, but because a lot of water is used in fracking. And so they're afraid that their water tables are going to be depleted, and then what do you do with the discharged water? So those are some other amendments that you will see. Sometimes they will want to put indemnity language in the amendment, and they will say, look, if there is any problem with the environment, if for any reason there is a lawsuit saying this environment is not healthy and we get sued, we the lessor, you're going to indemnify us. Indemnify, from the Latin, no damages. That means you are going to pay all their legal bills. So those are some common amendments when we talk about environmental. These are some common surface amendments. I just want you to be familiar with these. It usually says they'll pay you for damage to crops, to buildings, and other personal property. Sometimes they'll say timber. Again, this is what I said before, where they want approval to put where they're going to put that equipment and their placement. And then they're also going to want to be able to tell you or negotiate with you or consult with you about where you put those pipelines and those flow lines. There may also be beautification efforts. They might want you to paint the tanks. I've got a picture of that for you in a minute. Plant landscaping, those kinds of things. And then there's water usage, limiting the amount of water that you can use. This is a pretty standard clause, so we usually agree to that. This, if we can accommodate them, we will on this. Same thing here. Again, we're in a long-term relationship. Beautification efforts, while it may seem silly, that's really not that expensive, and we usually don't mind doing that. And then as far as water usage goes, that's just something that we need to negotiate whether or not your company would allow that. And, they also want to protect livestock, so put up cattle guards so the livestock will be safe. Those are all, for the most part, we really don't have any problem with these amendments. But it makes the landowner feel better. It makes the landowner feel like they're, negotiating with you. So whatever your company says about this, but generally speaking, these aren't that big of a deal. Okay, here's an example of, make them paint the tank. So rather than seeing this on their property, they want to see this on their property. Now, they don't have to go as far as this on their property, but, show their patriotism. But they basically want them to have low-profile tanks, that is, not towering into the sky, and they don't want them to look rusted with weeds all around them. They want them to look freshly painted, blending in as much as you can to the background, or, to show your patriotism. They may also require that you landscape around the sites, require weed control, plan on the roads, make sure there's no weeds on the sides of the roads, on the equipment and the gates. And if it's a scenic area, they may want you to bury your power lines in scenic areas. Again, depending on the size of your company, these can be accommodated or not, but they're pretty common. As far as protecting livestock, build cattle guards. Those are those little metal bars over a gate crossing or under a gate crossing. For some reason, the cows are afraid to cross over that cattle guard. So you want to build those cattle guards anytime there's an entry or an exit point. You may want to fence off areas. If you have livestock, you're going to ask them to put fences around your livestock so that they don't go and drink the contaminated water. Sometimes they may require you to have truck washing or decontamination to minimize the spread of diseases such as hoof and mouth disease, which are also contagious to humans. So, that might be they don't want you bringing in your truck with all the dirt on it onto their property and risking that their livestock may get sick. So those are some common amendments. And again, usually, they might be a pain, while we're drilling, but they really don't cost us that much money. So in general, we're pretty okay with it. This amendment, we do not want the landowners to know about this amendment. Whenever I speak to a group of mineral owners, I never bring this clause up, because what it says is that you give the landowner a certain bonus, a certain percentage in a certain term. This clause says if you give anyone else an amount greater to this, you have to come back and pay me the difference. So if you give me a 1/8 royalty and you grant someone else a 3/16, you have to give me the difference between the 3/16 and the 1/8. And this is a way that they can make sure that they are receiving the best bonus. A lot of times they don't want to sign a lease because they don't know what their neighbors are getting and they don't know if they're getting taken advantage of. Well, if they're familiar with the favored nations clause, they can ask for this. And depending on how badly your company wants the acreage, you may or may not agree to this. So this is what it says. It says, if within a specified, so many months from the date of this lease, lessee, its agents, partners, subsidiaries, affiliates, or assignees shall enter into an oil and gas lease on lands in this state and in this county, this state, located within, 3 miles of my property from any boundary of the lands that are subject to this lease, called the other lease, providing for a bonus on a per acre basis greater than the per acre bonus paid to the lessor for this lease, and or a royalty in an amount greater than what you provided for in this lease, then the lessee shall pay to the lessor as additional bonus for this lease an amount equal to the difference on a per acre basis. So what they're saying is, lessor, if we give someone else a higher royalty or a higher bonus, we're going to come back and make you whole so that you can tell all your neighbors and friends, I know I got the best deal because I had this clause in there. And or amend this lease to provide for lessor to be paid the greater royalty. So that means you're also going to amend the lease to make sure the greater amount is in there. Greater royal interest provided for in the other lease. Lessee's failure to perform the obligations provided for in this position within this time frame of the date on which a greater bonus is paid for or a greater royalty is provided for in the other lease, this lease shall automatically terminate. And lessor shall have no obligation to return any bonus payments or any other consideration paid by lessee to lessor. For the purposes of this provision, bonus shall be deemed to include any cash consideration paid to lessor, however called or characterized, or any benefit provided by the lessor by the lessee, and royalty shall be deemed to include any and all interest in production, however called or categorized in the oil and gas lease. We hate this provision. It puts an extremely onerous burden on us to go back and make people whole that didn't negotiate the best deal for themselves. The other thing we don't like about it is the dire consequence. This lease shall automatically terminate. The only other clause that could make automatic lease termination is failure to pay a delay rental if it's a delay rental lease. So to have this lease automatically expire if we don't meet those demands is a very onerous provision. I do want you to know that it is out there. Luckily, a lot of royalty owners don't know about it, but I want you to be familiar with. If your management doesn't bring this up, ask them how we feel about a favored nations clause. I can almost guarantee they're not going to like it. So that's another common amendment. Okay, I know we're running a little bit long here, but I just wanted to give you some hints and tips from the trenches. These are strategies that I've used, favorite phrases that I used if I want to persuade someone. The first one is, I'd love to do business with you. If I'm meeting with a landowner and they are close to signing the deal, I might say, I would love to do business with you, Mr. So-and-so. And what is he hearing? He hears, I love you. Now, how do I know that? Because when I was working at ExxonMobil, I had to decide between 3 brokers which one I wanted to hire, and I called and interviewed all 3 of them, and one of them said to me, I'd love to do business with you, Alice. And that's the guy that got the job, because what I hear is, wow, he'd love to do business. He would love to do business with me. So that's a phrase that I use. Really, I use that a lot in any kind of business situation, whether I'm negotiating a contract to train a group of people, or getting someone to sign up for my class, or getting a university to offer my certificate program. I would say, I would love to do business with you, especially if it's a man. It works like a charm. But it also works with women. Another tip is to, instead of coming right out and saying, would you take this as a bonus? That person's going to say yes or no. Instead of saying that, I would say, is there any way you would consider a bonus of such and such, or an environmental amendment that says something, something? I'm not asking for whether they would agree with it. I'm asking if they would consider it. So most people will say, yeah, I'll consider that. So now you've got them to say yes, and they haven't struck down, or they haven't, countered for you. So that's another kind of tricky way, not tricky, but another strategy, shall we say, another strategy to get people to agree with your way of thinking. I said earlier, you need to ask why they are countering. What's your main concern? I mean, get the information from them. Is it environmental? Is it the bonus? Is it the royalty? Is it what your parents told you to do? You were told never to take a lease on this property or grant a lease. What is your main concern? Another strategy that I've used is to give them an option. So, sir, were you wanting a higher royalty or a higher bonus? Well, you and I both know you can have a high royalty and a high bonus. But if you kind of give this false choice, it kind of gives you some wiggle room on one of the other provisions. So they say, well, I'd really rather have a higher bonus. Okay, well, if you agree to this royalty, we'll give you this higher bonus. So those are just some hints and tips from the trenches. So let's look at what we talked about today. We looked at an introduction, just gave you a basic definition of what it is to negotiate an oil and gas lease. And then we talked about how important the oil and gas lease was. And then we talked about the 10 steps to negotiating the oil and gas lease. I won't go through those with you again. Then we looked at some common amendments, some amendments that you'll see that typically come up that they usually ask for. And I kind of gave you a general feel about how we feel about how the oil and gas industry, as if I speak for the whole industry, in general, how those are perceived. And then I gave you some tips from the trenches. Now you know all my dirty little secrets. And that wraps up our conclusion. So thank you for attending this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.